On my 69th birthday, I thought the only surprises I'd get would come from the grandkids. Some crookedly wrapped Lego sets, a handmade card smudged with marker, maybe a cupcake with the frosting sliding off. I told Nora I didn't want anything big this year. Just family, a decent brunch, and enough coffee to keep up with the little ones. She'd outdone herself anyway. We had rented a glass-walled conservatory on the Portland waterfront. The kind of place where the walls catch the morning light and scatter it over polished wood tables. The Willamette shimmered in the background, dotted with sailboats that looked more like toys from where we sat. The place buzzed with the sound of cutlery and conversation. My grandchildren, 3 of them, each under the age of 8, took turns running between the tables, dodging chair legs and the occasional annoyed waiter. My son Caleb was chatting up some distant cousin by the buffet. My daughter-in-law was corralling her kids into sitting long enough to eat something more substantial than mini muffins. The air smelled faintly of rosemary, citrus, and fresh bread. For a moment, it was exactly the kind of day I'd wanted. Somewhere between the second coffee pot being refilled and the first round of champagne toasts, Nora leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, and said she'd be back in a bit, just a quick touch-up at the salon next door. I didn't think much of it. She's always been particular about appearances, and this was her event as much as mine. I watched her walk out into the thin coastal sunlight, her cream-colored coat swaying behind her, and turned my attention back to the table, where someone had just brought out a tray of smoked salmon and sliced figs. It was maybe 20 minutes later when I went looking for more dessert plates. The catering staff had stashed extras on a small service table near the back of the room, next to a rolling cart of glasses. That's when I saw them. 2 wine glasses, both freshly rinsed but unmistakably marked with identical lipstick smudges at the rim. I wouldn't have noticed if they'd been on opposite ends of the cart, but they sat together, stems almost touching, like they'd been set down at the same time. Right next to them, folded into a napkin as if it were just another piece of clutter, was a receipt from the Rosewater Grand Hotel. I know that hotel. It's the kind of place where the bellhop opens the door for you and there's a piano in the lobby playing itself. The suite listed was one of the corner ones, Riverview, with a nightly rate that would make most people sweat. The date on it was just 2 days ago. I slid the napkin back open, more out of disbelief than curiosity, and my hand brushed against something else. A blazer, navy wool, a subtle check pattern you only notice if you're close. Definitely not mine. For one thing, the sleeves were too short for my arms. For another, the lining inside was embroidered with a bespoke tag. OH. Not a brand logo, 2 neat initials, stitched in gold thread. I stood there for a second, listening to the muted hum of conversation behind me, the clinking of plates, the occasional high-pitched shriek from one of the grandkids. Then I folded the receipt back into the napkin, hung the blazer over the back of the service chair, and went to find Nora. She came back about 10 minutes later, her hair set just so, soft waves framing her face like she was in one of those magazine spreads where women pose in kitchens they've never cooked in. She smelled faintly of lavender and hairspray. "Find everything okay?" she asked, sliding back into her seat like nothing had happened. I didn't sit right away. Instead, I laid the napkin on the table between us, the receipt just barely visible inside. Her eyes flicked down, registered it, and then moved up to meet mine without a hint of surprise. "Probably from the venue staff," she said smoothly, plucking a grape from the fruit platter and popping it into her mouth. "You know how things get misplaced with all this chaos." "And the glasses?" I asked. She glanced toward the catering cart, shrugged lightly. "Must have been set there from another table. Honestly, Elliot, you're acting like we're in one of those mystery shows." She laughed, a little too lightly, and reached over to squeeze my hand. "It's your birthday. Enjoy it." I smiled, out of habit, not belief, and the conversation at the table swept us back in. Someone was telling a story about a fishing trip gone wrong. The kids had discovered that if they stomped hard enough on the floor, they could make the silverware on the tables rattle. Waiters brought out slices of cake on porcelain plates, and everyone sang. But even as I blew out the candles, the taste of frosting in my mouth, I kept seeing that blazer. The neat gold initials, the hotel receipt, the perfect hair Nora claimed to have just gotten touched up. The celebration went on around me, full of toasts and laughter and hugs, but somewhere inside me, something had shifted. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a kind of quiet recalibration, the unsettling click of a puzzle piece finding its place. The first clear signal that something in the life I thought I understood had just changed. I tucked the receipt into my wallet before we left the conservatory. Not because I planned to confront her right away, but because I knew I'd want to look at it again later, away from the noise, away from the practiced smile she'd been wearing all afternoon. We drove home that evening with the heater on and the radio tuned to some old jazz station. She hummed along softly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on her thigh. I looked out at the lights of the city sliding past, wondering how many of them were illuminating hotel rooms, and whether any of those rooms were meant for conversations like the one I knew someday soon we'd have to have. That night, after the last dish clinked back into the cabinet and the house settled into its hollow quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with the receipt spread flat under the lamp. When I couldn't stare it down anymore, I did what I always do when something feels wrong. I rewound. Not just the day, months. Things I'd ignored blinked like warning lights. Nora's phone started living in new places. Not on the charger by the bed, but face down in a drawer. Not on the kitchen counter, but zipped inside her tote. The passcode changed twice in 1 month. When I asked, she laughed. "You forget your passwords all the time, Elliot." Maybe. But security had never required her to angle the screen away from me whenever a message came in. Then there were her Pilates retreats, 2- and 3-day stretches where she'd leave before sunrise, return after sunset, and talk about reformers like old friends. I looked up a studio once. The photos showed a sunlit room with mirrors, very wholesome. But her returns didn't smell like eucalyptus oil and lemon water. Sometimes she came home with that hotel hallway scent. Overworked air and someone else's cologne. Around the same time, Owen Hale drifted deeper into our airspace. Our financial advisor, late 40s, charming in the forgettable way some men polish themselves to be. He wore a blazer like the one I found, navy, thin check, the kind of fabric that drapes too well to be off the rack. I remembered because he'd smiled when Nora complimented it and said, "Bespoke." They laughed, private. Her retreat weekends lined up with Owen's travel, innocently at first, then too neatly to stay innocent. A conference in Bend. A client meeting in Astoria. A seminar in Seattle about next-generation philanthropy. The overlaps kept finding me. A forwarded invite from Owen. A hotel charge in a town where Nora just happened to be resetting her spine. Same dates, same places. And then there were the dinners. Pricier places where menus don't list numbers. Bills appeared on a company card controlled by my son, Caleb. Notes read stakeholder outreach and partner social. Time-stamped late, 2 seats, tasting menu. Caleb wrote, "Owen's contacts, worth every penny." What also worked now, according to my son, was selling the old Timberland. He leaned on me to move parcels my father had held through fires, blight, and winters that break equipment and men. Dry powder, he kept saying. With Caleb it sounded like hunger. Every time he raised it, Nora nodded along. "It's about liquidity, not legacy," she told me once. Meetings multiplied without me. The new team became a phrase that lived in rooms I didn't enter. People described roadmaps I hadn't approved and initiatives I hadn't heard about. At first I thought it was my age. But the exclusion had a shape. Owen's decks, Caleb's jargon, Nora's "we've got it, Elliot." Like a hand guiding me toward the door. A lost earring under the passenger seat of Nora's car, gold. Not her style. "Beth's," she said. I gave her a ride. She texted Beth. Beth texted back a heart. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was all the same something. The house had new rhythms. Showers ran longer, ending with the fan humming while the mirror defogged. She took up night walks and came back glowing, claiming the air by the river felt restorative. I walked with her once to test the theory. The river behaved like a river. The air behaved like air. If I'm honest, I'd had chances to ask harder questions and chose mercy or cowardice. I'm still not sure which. I didn't want to tip our life onto a table and sort it into piles labeled truth and trash. At 69, you know how much energy it takes to rebuild a room after you blow out a wall. There's a cost to pretending the cracks are decorative, too. Caleb's ambition took on a quicker, nearly desperate shine. He started talking like a press release: impact, ecosystem, unlocking value. He floated hiring Owen's boutique firm for strategic alignment, which felt like paying the fox to measure the holes in your fence. When I refused, he took it as proof I didn't understand the future. He avoided the word obsolete, but I could hear it breathing at the end of our calls. My inbox filled with board materials I hadn't requested. In one deck, a slide about senior leadership transition stretched a timeline arrow suspiciously close to my birthday season. Exploratory only, Caleb said when I asked. Nora called it succession planning and told me to be flattered we'd built something worth inheriting. I started carrying a small notebook, the kind I used in the field when the trees were young and the crews were lean. I wrote down dates, charges, cities, the color of a jacket. It felt old-fashioned and a little paranoid, but it gave me ballast. Seeing the marks stack up on paper took the fog out of my head. The pattern that settled into view wasn't just about Nora. It wasn't just about Caleb. It was about the gravity around a third person and how it bent their orbits. Every strand I followed crossed the same nameplate on the same polished office door. Owen Hale, advisor, confidant, bridge to the next era. He was everywhere and nowhere, the whisper after I left, the extra glass, the initials stitched in a lining. I still didn't have proof. What I had was a chorus of small dishonesties humming under our days, the music of avoidance, and I had a feeling I recognized from years in the woods. The sense that the wind has shifted even before the treetops show it. You learn to trust that feeling. So I sat at the table, the receipt finally dry beneath my hand, and let the months replay until the reel went slack. When the house creaked and the refrigerator kicked on, I heard it as a metronome and counted my breaths to it. In. There are moments when you know you're standing on the lip of a decision and that whatever you choose next will echo. I wasn't ready to confront anyone. I wanted the truth to be something I could point at, not just something I could sense. I closed the notebook, slid the receipt inside, and turned off the lamp. Nora stirred when I lay down, murmured that the salon had been a madhouse, and kissed my shoulder. I kissed her forehead and stared at the ceiling until the shapes of our old life rearranged into something I no longer recognized. By morning, I'd settled on one clean next step: stop guessing. If there was a pattern, I would follow it to its center. If there wasn't, I'd learn what fear does to a man who loves his family. Either way, the questions deserved better than my imagination. And as much as it scared me to admit it, I already knew where the answers would begin, with the name stitched in gold inside a blazer that wasn't mine. I slept little. By dawn, the receipt left a faint rectangle on the table, a ghost of ink and pressure. I traced it and promised next step would be plain and undeniable. No more hunches, paper, names, timestamps, a door I could open. A week is a long time to live with a question that sits up at the end of your bed and watches you sleep. By the 7th morning after the brunch, I'd had enough of the staring. I made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and open my notebook to the page where the receipt rode like a pinned moth. I didn't feel like a detective. I felt like a husband who'd been giving everyone, including himself, too much credit. The hotel was my first stop. The Rosewater Grand has that careful hush rich places keep, the kind that makes you feel underdressed even in your best jacket. "Good morning," I told the front desk, placing my wallet, company card glinting, where it could be seen. "There's a charge on this account from 2 nights ago. Suite level. I need to verify details for audit." Audit is a magic word. The clerk smiled, typed, asked for ID, typed again. "Yes, sir. 2 guests, late check-in, room service charges." Her eyes lifted, professional but curious. "Would you like an itemized statement?" "I would," I said, and tried not to shake while I signed. The paper was clean. Arrival 10:42 p.m. 2 keys issued, room service at 11:13, champagne, A cheese plate, strawberries. The name on the reservation, Owen Hale. My mouth went dry enough to strike a match. On the sidewalk, I breathed through the kind of anger that feels less like fire and more like pressure in the ears. I had proof of spending, not proof of Nora. Clothes wasn't the same as true. I needed the thing that would not leave room for story or spin. Back inside, I asked for security. We audit charges against our cards. I told the manager, a neat man in a navy suit. When a vendor bills us, we verify. Sometimes that includes footage around the transaction time. I said it slowly, like a policy I'd repeated for years. In a way I had, just not here. He hesitated. We have to protect guest privacy. Of course, I said, and slid across a letterhead memo I drafted that morning, the language sturdy with legal tone. We're confirming that the card holder, I tapped my name, wasn't present, that there's no fraud exposure. We're not asking to publish anything. We're asking to eliminate risk. He read it twice, then called someone from the back. We walked to a small office that smelled faintly of toner and old carpet. The screens showed quadrants of the lobby, the front doors, the elevator bank, the bar. The security tech, a young woman with a board competence I respected, rolled back the timestamp to the night in question. At 10:36 p.m. the glass doors opened, and there she was, Nora, hair loose, coat open, laughing up at a man I recognized before the blazer even came into frame. Owen carrying a small overnight bag. They moved the way people move who have already crossed a line and decided to live there. He pressed the bell for the elevator with his knuckle. She tucked herself in at his side. The doors closed. The time mark blinked 10:38. I felt something in my chest go very still. Can we see the desk? I asked. Another camera, another angle. Owen handed his card across. The clerk doubled keys, slid them in a small envelope. Nora's fingers tapped the marble as she waited. A habit I hadn't noticed until I was watching her do it for someone else. They turned toward the elevators again. The camera lost them. The tech moved forward to 11:13, the room service cart entering the elevator, a silver bucket and 2 flutes. I didn't ask to go farther. I had what I came for. Could I get stills of the lobby arrival? I asked, voice steady because it had nowhere left to go. The manager shifted, but I kept my eyes on the screen. For our audit file showing card presence. I slid a retainer authorization across the desk and saw the moment cost defeated caution. The tech printed 3 screech *TS. Nora and Owen stepping into the frame. Owen paying. Both of them entering the lift. I tucked the images into my notebook sheath behind the receipt. Back home, I spread everything on the dining table like a map. The hotel bill, the screech *TS, the list of overlapping trips. Anger kept threatening to crash into grief. There would be time for both later. Right now, there was only paper. I scanned the stills to a private folder, added timestamps, and wrote a factual caption under each. If anyone decided to argue context. I wanted to be the calmest man in the room with the neatest file. Neat files spare you the extra wound of doubt. When Nora came home that evening, I had already put everything away. I cooked pasta, poured her a glass of wine, asked about her day. She told me about errands. I nodded. I did not ask her where she had been on the night the elevator doors closed on both of them. That came the next morning. I put the printed photos on the table the way you place tools before you fix a fence. Lined up, clean, no drama. I need you to tell me what this is, I said. She looked, and in the first half second I saw all the stories she might try to tell gallop through her eyes. Then stop. She pressed her lips together until the color left them. It's not what you think, she said. Then say what it is. She sat down. The chair creaked. It started as work, she said. Advice. He's been helpful with Caleb, with the foundation. And then I forgot to keep it where it belonged, she said, too calmly. I'm not excusing it. I'm telling you how it happened. How long? A few months, she said. Longer if you count talking like it wasn't. She reached for my hand. I didn't move mine. I'm sorry, Elliot. Sorrow isn't a solvent. It doesn't dissolve the fact of what was done. It only adds weight. Thank you for saying it, I said. I gathered the photos back into their sleeve. The file was closed. After she left for a long walk that I didn't follow, I called our counsel from the office line. I need a new attorney, I said, quietly. While the receptionist patched me through, I took the notebook from my drawer and wrote one short line under the date. Confirmed. I did not raise my voice. I didn't throw anything or pace or perform. I sat in my own kitchen and let the truth sit beside the sugar bowl like a third-place setting. It is strange how ordinary a catastrophe can look in daylight. The faucet drips. A delivery truck sighs out on the street. Somewhere a neighbor laughs at a show. Inside those ordinary sounds, a marriage shifts from noun to past tense. I kept breathing and kept my questions few, because questions invite theater, and I wasn't cast. I wanted sentences that could be filed and dated, not fireworks that burn fast and leave smoke. So I wrote times, places left the pain to arrive later, when the paperwork slept. I saved copies to a drive only I use, labeled with a bland project name no one would click. I dated the envelope and slid it behind the manuals in the pantry. Felt clerical, not vengeful. But order is a kind of kindness to your future self, the one who must speak without shaking in time. I didn't shout and I didn't stage a scene. I did something colder. I made appointments. By Tuesday, I was in a corner office 30 floors above the river, sitting across from a woman whose handshake said she'd already won more than I'd ever lose. New counsel. No history with my family. No cozy lunches with Owen. No sentimental debt to Caleb. I laid out the file, the receipt, the stills, the notes, and then the other file, the one that smelled like cedar and old ink, our governance documents. I need discretion and speed, I told her. And I need a firewall. Starting now, nothing goes through the usual channels. She nodded, took the folders, and read. The room went quiet except for paper turning and the low hum of a building that never sleeps. When she finished, she tapped the 1987 Trust Charter with a lacquered nail. Does anyone else living remember what's in this? My grandfather did, I said. He wrote most of it with a judge who didn't trust any of us. Good, she said. Distrust makes better documents than love. By noon, Owen's access to our accounts and shared drives was revoked. His firm's emails began bouncing. Notices went out terminating every mandate with his name on it. The board chair, an old friend who once taught me to swing a Pulaski, called to ask if I'd lost my mind. I told him I'd finally found it. He asked for a meeting. I offered 2 times and a room with a long table and no coffee. Everybody thinks better when their mouths are dry. Nora came home to a house that had rearranged itself. The framed photo of our last gala was gone from the entryway. The secure drawer in my office, where we keep the boring important things, stood open, half the files already at counsel's office getting copied and cataloged. She watched me place a brass key on the desk, the one she used for the old safe. We're changing combinations, I said. She nodded, small, like agreeing with the weather. What I didn't tell her yet was what we'd found in the charter. A clause my grandfather had tucked into a section nobody reads because it's written like a sermon. Duties of an heir. The language was plain but heavy. If any heir, by public act, disavows the head of family or inflicts reputational harm upon the house, that heir's beneficial interest is deemed renounced. Assets designated to that heir flow automatically to alternate beneficiaries pre-approved by the board and fixed against revision by sentiment, pressure, or time. It was a fuse wired to pride. I remembered the day the charter was signed. I was 31. A forester with sap on my knuckles and a head full of acreage. My grandfather rested his hand on the papers like they were a newborn. This is how you keep the family from burning itself down, he said. Back then I thought he meant cousins arguing over ornaments. He was thinking about boys like my son. Caleb had been circling new money like a hawk, eyes sharp for quick prey. The morning after I cut Owen loose, my son sent 3 messages in a row. What did you do? Pick up. We're exposed. I let them sit. At 10, he stormed into my office without knocking, jaw set the way mine gets when a saw binds. You can't just pull mandates, he said. We've got deals in motion. We had, I said. Now we have a clean house. He laughed, a brittle sound. You are so out of your depth, Dad. This is why people think you're obsolete. There it was, the word he'd avoided. I didn't correct him. I slid the charter across the desk and told him to read Section 12 aloud. He got to the clause and stopped. This is ridiculous, he said. You can't enforce this. I don't have to, I said. The charter enforces itself. He left with fury he couldn't spend, and the next thing I saw of him was public. A post on his carefully tended channels. Photos of him in hard hats, sleeves rolled, pretending to be near work. The caption said he was severing ties, that he could no longer endorse the regressive approach of the prior generation. That new leadership would deliver what I never could. He emailed the board, donors, and a few journalists the same message. He thought he was accelerating a transfer. He was activating a trap. The board chair called within the hour. He made it public, I said. Section 12 is clear. There was a pause long enough to hold a decade. Then he exhaled. We'll record the trigger. Law sounds bloodless until it reaches your own. We convened in that long room with its mean light. Counsel walked the board through the process. A finding of trigger, a minute entered, notices to trustees and banks. No speeches, no catharsis, just signatures. I signed last, not to savor anything but because my hand shook and I didn't want to smudge the ink. When it was done, I stepped into the hallway and leaned my head against cool glass. The city kept going, buses, a siren, the thin stripe of the river shivering in the wind. I thought of my son as a boy, bringing me bark chips in his small fists, telling me each was a boat. There is no clause that makes that memory less true. At home, Nora asked what would happen to Caleb. I told her the truth. His rights under the trust would be treated as if he had predeceased the distribution. The assets earmarked for him would pass to the alternates my grandfather and the old board had approved decades ago. I could hear the click of that history sealing behind us. Who are they? She asked. People who did their jobs when it was hard, I said. That night I slept for the first time in weeks. Not well, but without dreams that wake you with your own name in your mouth. In the morning, counsel sent a tidy email. Banks acknowledged receipt. The registrar entered the minute. Owen's firm had returned our files under threat of injunction.